back to the Blind Horse Project podcast. For those of you just joining, the Blind Horse Project aims to bring awareness and education about our equine friends after they lose their eyesight. In many rescues across the USA, if a horse is brought in that is blind, they are immediately put down without thought of rehabilitation or being put back to work. Similarly, most equine boarding facilities, which is how the majority of people house their horses, do not accept blind horses for board. And oftentimes, when an owner's beloved horse goes blind, the first thing that they hear from the professionals and the people around them is often the recommendation to put their horse down. The Blind Horse Project aims to bring the happy, actual reality to light in the public eye, that our horses can far more easily adjust and thrive than we give them credit for. We argue that our horses do not need to be euthanized after they lose their eyesight, and that once adjusted, our blind horses can come back to work as family horses, as competition horses, and even as therapy horses. We argue this by bringing the little-known but large community of blind horse owners into the limelight and give them a platform to share their journeys with the world. This is the Blind Horse Project.
Hi, Lucinda. Thanks for joining us on the Blind Horse Project podcast today.
Sorry, cut out there for a second. Hi.
Oh, that's okay. So, Lucinda owns Stardust Rescue, if I'm saying that correct?
Yes.
And she is one of our ambassadors, and we are so happy to have her on board with us. And today she's on the podcast to talk a little bit about her rescue and about the blind horses that have changed her perspective on them. So Lucinda, feel free to take it away. How did you start your rescue? What was the inspiration for that? And just kind of go from there.
Perfect. Thank you. So with the rescue, as everything starts when it comes to horses, it all starts with a horse. I kind of got back into them as an adult. Like there was a huge gap, between childhood and being thrown on ponies and then becoming an adult and getting my first horse. It's pretty crazy. So like with the name Stardust Rescue, it actually comes from my main mare, who her full name is Missing Stardust. She was a grade appy. I was in a dark time in my life, and she kind of came along and grabbed me out of the depths at a time that I needed her most. And so that's why I named the rescue after her in part. Also because, we're all sorry, my cat's probably going to be meowing in the background. Part of the theory is that we are all made of stardust, and to me, it just kind of brings everything full circle to give hope to those horses and the animals that are coming in our rescue, because it's not just small animal, it's also large animal.
That is beautiful.
So it's, no matter what happens from the time that we're born to the time that we pass, we are just stardust that's just living in the moment. And then once we pass, it's released back into the earth, basically. This cat is driving me crazy. So it's like I rescued her, and I kind of rescued each other. She was in a weird situation, and I needed help, and we needed each other, and that's kind of how the journey started. As a few years passed, I wound up just kind of surfing through Facebook. I was like, oh, well, I want to help like another horse. I need to get another horse anyway because she needs a buddy. And that's kind of how I started my rescue journey. I rescued 2 foals. One was about a yearling, one was younger than that, and we weren't sure they were going to survive, and we managed to get them healthy, get them homes. There's a little black filly, and her name was Nova, and that's kind of what inspired me to start rescuing, was her journey, and Jet was the other foal that I had. And they started the journey, and rolling from there, 2020 came about, the whole pandemic. I wound up having to rehome her. She went to an amazing home. Jet also went to an amazing home doing what he does best, which is pulling things all over the place, which if you were a person, he would drag you, because that's just how he was. And, but it's, he's very giraffe mentality. Yeah, he's up north logging now. Like, he helps pull logs into areas so that way the truckers can actually pull them out. So he's having a grand old time with that up north. She actually went and started helping work with like kids who couldn't afford to get in 4-H programs and helping therapy and things like that. So she had a really good home. And it's like, after rescuing those two, I was like, okay, well, maybe I can keep doing this. And then I was like, okay, well, let's think about this. You know, what are we gonna do? And then 2021 rolled around, and I was like, oh, you know, everything's going good. And then I wound up breaking my back because I was apprenticing with a trainer at the time, and I broke my back riding a colt. And that was, there's a whole situation behind it, but we didn't realize it for 6 months until I was almost paralyzed. So
Wow.
it was crazy. Like, they didn't even realize the extent on the MRIs, like how bad it was, until I finally was like, hey, I can't move my right leg anymore. Like, I am in so much pain. I'm paralyzed on this side. Like, what do I do? They went in for surgery, and they were like, well, thank God you advocated for yourself, because you almost severed your L5, so it would have been permanently paralyzed had I waited another week, at least on my right leg. And so, you know, I came out of surgery with that, and I wound up finding this ad on Craigslist, which I shouldn't have been surfing Craigslist to begin with, especially after just having a surgery and already owning one horse. And I wound up coming across a little sorrel gelding who, this guy was like, I want to buy a horse. I'm going to use this horse for my college project, and threw him out with cows and then left him out there. Didn't even care. He was probably coming to at the time, and he was emaciated. He almost looked clubbed foot because he had foundered so bad, and he was only coming to. So I was like, okay, I can't leave this little guy. Like, there's something about his picture that's just screaming that he needed help. And so I started diving into the rescue again. And so I rescued, we named him Mars, because he was a red horse, like the Mars rover, because Mars is the red planet. I thought that was kind of ironic that all of these horses that I was rescuing wound up with some sort of name that had to do with like planets and stars, and I just kind of kept rolling with it. But I got him healthy. You know, we checked out everything. Thankfully, he wasn't clubbed-footed. It was just because he had foundered, so he obviously had corrective trimming. We got him going. All of this is right before I actually had my surgery. So I was doing all of his training, doing everything up to his first ride, and all while I had a busted back. And so
women, we're a different breed.
We're definitely a different breed. I have a high tolerance for pain, and it's a blessing and a curse. So, nope. But you know, I got him up to his first ride. I was like, okay, well, I can't do like more than just sit on him because I don't want to cause more issues with myself. But I was like, maybe somebody would find him interesting as a project. He was really athletic. He was going to be big. And some friends of mine actually adopted him and renamed him Rocky. He's now living in Texas. He's almost 16 hands, and he is living his best life. He's going to be started here in spring, like restarted, I should say, but with proper rides and everything, because I couldn't give him those proper rides. Luckily, he has that foundation, like the groundwork foundation. His attitude will tell you differently, but he's living his best life in Texas, and I couldn't be more grateful. And then it wasn't even 2 months after that when I had my surgery, and I got contacted by a friend of mine who owns a rescue in eastern Idaho. And she said, hey, this gal's reaching out to me to take 2 studs. They're out of a hoarding situation. I don't know what to do. I'm not set up for studs. I'm only set up for babies. And, you know, general horses that aren't studs. And I was like, okay, well, let me think about it. I just had back surgery, and this is while I'm in the hospital recovering. I'm getting these messages, not only from her, but also from the lady that reached out to her, and another rescue as well, you know, that had known me and was asking if I was willing to take these 2 studs because they didn't have the room. So I kind of fumbled myself, and I said, I guess I'll take them. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I will give it a try. And that's how I wound up with Aries and Apollo. I didn't know they were Appaloosas until they stepped off of my friend's trailer. And I laughed because the irony is that my main mare is an Appy and I love Appaloosas. And she's like, you're never going to believe what color they are. And then I looked inside the trailer and I said, well, I'll be damned. It's 2 Appaloosas. So we wound up with Aries and Apollo. They had been attacked by a cougar some years ago. The owner basically gave him a tetanus shot and said, figure it out. And these were the first 2 that he was willing to part with. He still knew what bloodlines they came from, what the breeding was, etc. And so he surrendered them to me, and I put them out in a quarantine pasture that I had at the time. And Apollo had a really bad leg. I'm sure I've sent you pictures. We suspect that he probably had wire down to the bone. His leg was horrendous. He still got around just fine, and this is where it started getting into blind horses. I noticed that Apollo had some blue in his eye. Aries looked fine, but his eyes were constantly getting a little red and puffy, and I wasn't sure if it was the dust at the time, and they were unhandled studs, so we were just trying to do everything we could to try and get them refed because they were pretty skinny. You know, get them wormed, get them fed. We were giving Apollo some antibiotics as well as pain medications because of his leg, and we just kind of rolled along for that month-long quarantine until Apollo became septic, and so we wound up having to put him down. There was probably 12 of us there for that, and that not a dry eye happened. And I wasn't sure if the blue in his eye was from like cataracts or if it was always just the lighting. It was so hard to tell because I couldn't get up close and like halter him and actually look in his eyes and have a vet look at him. And so we wound up taking Aries after Apollo was put down, and we took him to a boarding facility where we started working. I had a trainer working with him at first just to get him halter broke, just because I was working a 9-to-5 at the time, and I've got 2 kids and everything was kind of busy. And so, you know, we started noticing that there were just things here and there, like his eyes were constantly getting swollen and weepy. And I was like, okay, well, he's an Appy, you know, my mare's eyes get a little weepy, you know, due to dust and the sunlight. So I constantly fly mask her. And so I was constantly fly masking him, just trying to figure out what was going on. Then we started getting into trying to saddle train him. And he was constantly, you know, he'd see everything. We desensitized him really well. But he, every once in a while, would just spook at things that he had seen 1,000 times. And so we couldn't figure out what was going on. And I was like, oh, maybe he's just got a bad attitude. Maybe he's just a jerk. Like, maybe he's just one of those sassy Appies that has, you know, an attitude problem. That turns out was not the case. And we just kept rolling with it. We were like, okay, like, we're just going to work him through this attitude. We're just going to keep pushing him and see if we can get him out of it. And it seemed fine until he wound up throwing the guy that we hired to help us do first rides. Because this was after my back, like really fresh after my back surgery. And I did not want to be riding around something that's going to bronch higher than panels at the time. Because Aries has a pretty nasty buck on him. Like, I could tell you he would probably aspire to be a rodeo horse if he could see. But it was crazy. Like, we couldn't figure out what it was. He had walked through shadow. He had a 5-inch shank bit in his mouth. It got janked on, and he just launched this dude, wound up breaking the guy's arm. And I was like, okay, you know what? We're just going to bring him back. We're going to decompress, and we're going to start over. Well, during that decompression time, because I gave him 4 months to decompress, we started noticing he couldn't find his grain. Every time we'd go to grain him in the evening, he couldn't find it. Unless we had to start guiding him to it. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand what's going on. I was like, let's take him to the vet and just have his eyes looked at. I suspected he was moon blind, which Appies are, you know, with certain LP aspects, are born, you know, moon blind. They have night blindness. They don't it's no different. They're born that way, so they don't recognize a difference when they walk through shadow or when they're put in a shadowy place. They just can't see. And so I knew he was probably that at nighttime. I didn't realize he had uveitis until we went to the vet. She said, there's some things I'm seeing. I'm going to refer you to the specialist we have. And so we met with the specialist, and she said, you have a horse who has equine recurrent uveitis. This was within 6 months of me having Aries. And so we started doing medications to try and help reduce the flare-ups. And with knowing that he was going blind, I said, I have to do something. I'm gonna restart him, which the trainer that I was working with at the time for him was kind of surprised that I would even try. But I said, he's young enough, he can learn. We might as well give him the chance. Because I was looking at him for like potentially my next riding horse, which it's not that he can't get there. I just have to find the courage to get him there. And I know it's going to take time because he is one who likes to work on his time, not necessarily on mine, which is okay. So we started working with him. I restarted him completely. Like, we wound up moving facilities. I moved him to where he was with my mare. So that way they could bond. So when he lost his sight, he would have a horse to latch onto and to help him gain confidence, because she's one of those that, like, she doesn't allow him to be babied. She goes, no, I'm not going to help you with that. You can do it yourself. No, you can't come and buddy up on me that much. But then she also helps keep an eye on him and keep him off fence lines. And, you know, if he gets too far away, she'll nicker at him to try and bring him back. So it was a really good situation. And so I took him to that facility and we wound up completely restarting. I did everything again from the ground up. Everything he already knew with his foundation, everything from haltering to just coming in and talking to him to let him know that I was there. And I started putting verbal cues to everything. When I walk in to halter him, I'll call him up to the gate, and then I'll tell him halter, and he'll put his nose down a little bit. I'll halter him up, and we would walk. And I just started everything, just from the ground up again. We ground drove him. I worked with the trainer I had apprenticed for at the time, you know, just trying, bouncing off ideas, like, what can I do? How can I help him? Like, how is this going to be easier? Like, I feel like this is too difficult. What can we do this way? Because it was the only person I had to bounce ideas off other than Endo, the blinds owner. I contacted her a few times and she basically told me to do everything that I was doing already. Start with verbal cues, restart everything, make sure that you're getting everything from the ground up. So it was nice to have somebody that I could bounce things off of. And so that's what I did. And now he's a horse who can do some liberty as long as he's in the brain setting for it. And he's done amazing. I never thought we were going to get as far as we did. Like, I had my own doubts, and it wasn't in him, it was in myself and my ability to get him there. This horse has been saddled, he has been ridden. I wouldn't say he's broke. He's nothing fancy, but he can ride. He just has to be in the mindset. Otherwise, it's a 50-50 shot. If he's not there, then he's like, oh, well, I'm just going to buck a couple of times because I don't want to do the work today.
Well, and that's what can happen with any green horse under saddle anyways.
Yeah, and that's pretty typical. And some days I can push him through it and we ride just fine. We can get like a 2 to 3 hour ride and be perfect. And then other days he's like, I am seriously done. I can't function in this brain space right now. And it's like, okay, well, let's step back. We'll just do groundwork instead. We'll do maybe a couple more things. Like, I've put flags on him. I've put flags off of the top of, you know, the round pen, so that way he had to go under them. And with the fact that he has gone blind, he lost complete sight in his eye last summer. And last spring, I should say. And within 2 months, it progressed so aggressively. Oh, sorry, my alarm's going off. There we go. It progressed so aggressively that when we went in to do the surgery, because there is surgical implants that they can place in their eye that help produce a medication that can last years, to help reduce the amount of flare-ups of equine recurrent uveitis. So it's less painful, it doesn't flare up as much, it's not gonna hurt them. I never realized just exactly how painful it was until we started talking about that option. So, I tried to fundraise for 2 years, and it was we just couldn't get enough. We finally managed to get the down payment, and within the 2 months from his pre-op to his surgery day, he went completely blind. She had never seen it progress so aggressively in that short amount of time, with the fact that we were doing medications, that she was actually surprised. When she came out, she looked at me and she was tearing up, and she says, "I have bad news." And I'm panicking, thinking maybe like when he was sedated, he fell and something, he injured himself so severely that there's nothing we can do, because horses are big and that happens. And so my heart sunk, and I was like, "What happened? What's going on?" And she looks at me and she goes, "He's too far gone. We can't do the surgery. He's blind in both eyes." And my heart broke. I was like, "I thought we had time. I thought we could do this. I thought this was going to be the best thing for him." And she goes, "You were doing everything right. Sometimes there's nothing we can do." And so we wound up just doing some steroid injections just to help reduce the amount of flare-ups. And it did. It worked for about 6 months. So he was really good up until, now where he's flaring up again. But I was like, okay, well, at least we did something. She said, "Just continue the medication, give him the best life we can. We'll look into a nucleation." She goes, "Right now, I don't want to cross that bridge, even though, we could, just to preemptively avoid issues." But she didn't want to cause unnecessary stress. And I agreed. I said, "Let's wait to see if something's going to happen, because sometimes they'll ulcerate their eyes because they're rubbing on them, or, the eyes themselves get too much pressure." And so we just kind of rolled with that. And that's kind of where Aries is now, is we're just giving him the medications and just kind of rolling with it until it's time to potentially look at the enucleation. I still have people look at me and say, "You might as well put him down. He's going to be dangerous. He's this, he's that." And I look at him and I look at them and I go, "There's nothing wrong with him." They're like, "Well, he's blind." I'm like, "Would you put down a blind dog? If the dog is young enough and still has time to adapt and can still live, he's adapted just fine." A lot of people don't even realize he's blind because he doesn't do the cute blind head tilt. Like, I love the blind head tilt, but he doesn't do it, which is very surprising to me, considering he can't see at all. But he acts like a normal horse. He still plays. He still gets around just fine. He knows where the fencing is. He finds his food. He finds his water. He plays with all the other horses. You would never know that he's blind unless I told you.
How long did it take him to be able to start finding his food and whatnot?
So it really didn't take him long, quite honestly. I think after he completely lost his sight, when we did change stalls at that time, we showed him once when we changed stalls. But then when we changed stalls the next time, they asked, everybody asked if I was going to help him. And I said, "No, I want to see how long it's going to take him to figure it out." Because all the stalls were set up differently. And it literally took him not even 20 minutes to find where his food was, where his water was, who his neighbors were. Like, he figured out the entire setup of his stall, where certain spots were. Like, if the ground dipped, he had figured that out. He knew exactly where everything was, and then found his favorite roll spot. So it didn't take him long at all. I was really amazed at how short of amount of time it took him to figure it out. Like, he amazes me every day. Like, I know a lot about horsemanship and how horses work, but he completely changed my perspective. And it was amazing. I said, okay, if he has a chance, how many other horses still have a chance out there? And so I had people reach out to me. They were like, I have a blind horse. What do I do with this? Or my grandparents have a blind horse. What do we do? He just went blind. He's broke to ride, but he's starting to panic. And I said, is he starting to panic because he's blind or because everybody's treating him differently? I said, how much of it have they tried to translate across? How much of this have they tried to rework with verbal cues? I said, if he was already verbally trained, under saddle, and he knows walk, trot, and canter verbally, why are they having issues now? And I actively tried to get them to surrender this horse to me. I even offered to do training. I offered to help them restart anything that I could, and they still wound up letting him go, which broke my heart because I kept telling them, I said, he has a chance. If I have a horse that was not saddle broke, who I wasn't sure was going to succeed as well as he has, why can't your horse do the same? And that was kind of challenging for them. They said, well, we don't understand, this is just how it's been, which granted, with the older generation, when it came to horsemanship, if there was something severely wrong, you got rid of the horse. And so that's kind of how their mentality was until they started seeing videos, and all of a sudden the regret set in. They were like, we didn't know that he could have done this. We didn't know that we could have done any of these things. And I said, you just had to give him the chance. And that's why I started advocating a lot. We took Aries out for his first event, and it was an equine trail sports competition. And he placed 12th out of 150 people in hand, and he's blind. And nobody realized he was blind. They were like, oh, you're just really adamant about your verbal cues. And I would look at him and I said, he can't see. That's the difference between these horses that you're seeing right now and him, is he is completely blind. And it baffled the judges. They said, I didn't know a blind horse could do that. And so on his stall, when we were at the expo, I put up a sign that said, please be kind, I am blind. And just said, please don't pet me, because I didn't want him to spook and anybody get accidentally injured or him injure himself because he spooked and slammed himself into the side. And that drew a crowd, because the only other horse they had ever seen that was blind at the expo was when Endo the Blind had come to town. And so they were like, well, what caused him to be blind? Was he born that way? Like, what things happened and what has he done, and things like that. And it became a big educational aspect for a good amount of people. I probably talked to 50 people that day. I mean, there was a large crowd, and we educated people. I took him out of his stall, and he stood there and just got pets from people, and they were like, well, can he pick up his feet? And I said, well, why don't you ask him? And they'd walk over and they'd pick up his feet. And it changed a lot of people's perspectives. One gal came over and she said, I thought this was the end of my 4-H horse because he's partially blind. She goes, you're showing me that he can still do things. I said, well, he's only partially blind. Aries is fully blind and can still do these things, so why can't your partially blind horse do it? And she's like, well, I just didn't think he could, so I've left him in the pasture. She says, now I know that he has a chance. And so she reached out to me a couple of times to get some clues, get some hints, just try and figure out what can I do for a horse that's blind on one side. And now that horse has gone completely blind, and he's still doing good. He's still a 4-H horse. He's just kind of been passed down through the family now with all the kids. So I'm really proud that me taking Aries to the expo changed that perspective, and it helped somebody else. And so that's kind of how it's rolled, and that's how I got really interested in helping blind horses. I was like, if he had a chance, how many others weren't given the chance? And, I did reach out to some other rescues before, like Les Haven's one that's up in Montana that deals specifically with blind horses, and she does amazing work. With Aries and his herd that he came from, because that was a really bad hoarding situation. We did network out 150 horses out of that herd and found them homes, and there was a lot of them that were appies that did wind up having uveitis. And my friend she took 20 horses herself out of that herd. And she was like, what do I do with these horses? We're getting ready to start them. I'm noticing they've got uveitis. What do I do? How can I help them? And so, I gave her kind of all of the advice that I could with what I did with Aries, and she's ran with it and found all of those horses homes. They're treated no differently than any other horse. They have adapted just fine. So it's been a crazy journey. And then, of course, February rolled around. We rescued Ari. She's sighted. Ariella is a sighted horse. She's a baby. She's only 4. Rescued her from the kill pen, and I thought that was going to be kind of my quota for rescuing for the year, because I wasn't expecting to take an adult-sized horse. And then I wound up talking with somebody. This was last year that I started talking to them. They were looking for a home for 3 horses, and they knew that one of them was blind. And I had reached out and I said, well, if you're willing to separate, I can take the blind one, or I can take all 3. I own a rescue. I have experience with blind horses. I've got 3 years under my belt at this point with my one particular blind horse. Maybe I can help your blind horse. And, they were like, oh, well, we're not really interested in separating. Kind of went back and forth. And then, not even a month ago, I wound up getting contacted again. They said, hey, we still can't find homes for these horses. Rescues have turned us away because, we have the blind one. Are you still able to take these horses? And I said, yes. Granted, I had not seen them other than pictures, which they were a little skinny, and I really didn't think anything about it. I was like, okay, well, which one's blind? Is it the Appy, or is it, which one? And so they said it was the gray horse. And I said, okay. So I didn't realize that she was an Appy until I went and met her, but I also didn't realize the extent. So we rescued Shay, Talus, and Ginger. Ginger also was blind from uveitis. She was also a snow-capped varnish Appaloosa. She was supposedly 19, which was not the case, but her eyes were severely atrophied, and I was worried. I was like, okay, well, let's see. I was worried about her weight. I was like, what can we do? Can I start her on medication? Can we get her enucleated, because she's clearly in pain? And, I started running through the checklist. I said, okay, what can we do? What verbal cues does she know? What does she know? What can I help her with? How can I restart her? What medications? What surgery? How long is it going to take to get the appointment? How quickly can I get her healthy enough to be able to get the surgery? And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago when we took them to the vet, we found out she had a grade 4 to a grade 5 heart murmur. On top of her uveitis, she also had a tumor in the one eye that had been turned due to that tumor. She also had, her blood work was terrible, and she was probably closer to 30 than we had expected. So we did let her go. And it's not because she was blind, it was because the cards were stacked against her and she had already been on borrowed time. We weren't even sure, with the fact that her heart had stopped twice at the vet's office, if she was even going to survive the trailer ride back. So that was extremely heartbreaking, because I was so excited to work with her and help her gain her confidence back. And unfortunately, as I said, the cards were stacked against her and we wound up having to let her go, which again was just absolutely heartbreaking. It still hurts, like when I see her tail in the tail bag, because I still have yet to take it over to our memorial piece creator. And it's sad, and it broke my heart to have to do it, but it had nothing to do with the fact that she was blind. And that's what a lot of people didn't understand. They were like, well, you put her down because she was blind. And I said, no, it's because X, Y, and Z. It had nothing to do with the fact that she couldn't see. We also found out at that vet visit that Talus is mostly blind. Talus is the colored Appy. She's 34 years old, estimated. she also has uveitis, or at least the beginnings of it, as well as a ton of cataracts due to her age. And so she's actually adapted really well. I've been working with her on some more verbal cues, like just reestablishing things that she already knows. She may be on borrowed time as well because she also has a heart murmur. And due to her age, they said she could have anywhere from 2 months to 2 years. And I said, well, that's still enough time. Let's give her that time until I have to make that decision. And she gets around amazingly. Like, she can only see maybe shadows at this point. But she gets around just as good as any other horse. She still, she still gets around. She still plays with what energy she does have. She does interact with everybody. She knows where the fencing is. She finds the food just fine. Let me tell you, if you've got cookies in your pocket, she'll hunt you down. Like, she definitely knows, like, they're no different than any other horse. And that's part of why I want to change the perspective. Like, I didn't realize just how much my perspective would change until I got Aries. And it's amazing. Like, it opened my eyes to more possibilities. And I said, okay, so now I can help people whose horses are starting to go blind due to cataracts, or, I can start helping people and advocating for these horses because there's nothing wrong with them other than they can't see. And that's amazing to me. And then, of course, I found the Blind Horse Project, and because it's like I found a blind horse group, and they're like, oh, well, we can all bounce training ideas. If people need help, they can come and ask advice. And then it was honestly not even a week later that I had found the Blind Horse Project on TikTok, of all places. And that's kind of how I reached out to you guys to start working with all of that. And that was before I had even gotten the Golden Girls Senior, the Golden Senior Girls of Shay, Talus, and Ginger. And I was really excited. And so now, knowing that there's so many other people out there who have given blind horses a chance, I'm really excited to continue working that and advocating and educating people. Because again, they're no different than any other horse. We've been proving that with all of the videos that we've been doing. I prove that every time I take Aries out to an event. And the only thing that I've noticed that he has issues with is getting into the trailer. And that's just because he's like, okay, I have to judge this distance. And so we just take a little extra time to get him loaded into the trailer. And it's the same thing with Talus. They just have to adjust. And that's how Ginger was too. When she would load into the trailer, she would have to put her nose down, find exactly where the distance was, and then she'd load up. So that's been the only kind of hiccup. Other than that, they're completely normal. They still run, they still play. Aries rides when he wants to. So it's, that's all been, it's been perfect. I have no issues. They're still normal horses. And that's the biggest thing that I want to try and get out there for people, is that there's still a chance. They still have life left. Let them be happy. Like, you can still do so many things with the horse, whether they're sighted or not sighted. And that's kind of where we're at right now with the rescue and everything. We just moved to our own facility, and let me tell you, as soon as Aries hit that pasture, he was running around like crazy. He followed the fence line all by himself, and then ran back up to me and just rolled in the grass. So it's, he knows exactly where everything is. He figured it out on his own, again, within 20 minutes. He, of all things, he was the easiest one to catch, which made me laugh because my sighted personal mare just kind of looked at me and was like, nah, there's grass out here. And Aries was like, Mom's calling. It's time to go in. And he trotted up, let me catch him, and I put him into the dry paddock for the night, and, you know, he walked around, checked out each feeder, found where the water was. I did wind up putting the water outside the overhang that's there, because I've noticed since he's gone blind, he doesn't like going under the shelters as much. If he does, it's like just enough to get his body out of the rain, not necessarily his head. And I think that's mostly just because the sound that the tin roofing makes on some of those shelters. But, you know, he still goes under it. He still goes and explores. He's very curious, which is amazing. I didn't realize, like, again, he's constantly changed my perspective. I didn't realize that a blind horse could have so much confidence. And I think a good part of that was that I gave him a really good foundation and told him that no matter what happens, he was always going to be safe. Granted, do I let him find the hot wire on his own? Yes. But at the same time, like, he has to know that that's there so he can understand the boundary, which, again, like, he normally doesn't actually touch the hot wire. He knows exactly where it's at. My sighted mare, he's very bonded with, you know, if she notices that he's running like full speed ahead going at a fence, then she'll kind of turn him around. But that's just because she's like, I don't know if he's paying attention, and there's a fence right there. Like, she takes good care of him as well, on top of everything, and she's starting to lose her sight as well due to cataracts. And I'm like, well, at least, you know, we can start. I already know kind of what to do after working with Aries, but she's probably got like 10 more years before she actually loses her sight. So, you know, I'm not really worried about her. But I think between having a good horse that was willing to teach him to be a little more independent, even when he was flared up and a little less confident in himself, like, if she noticed that he wasn't moving around in the pasture, she'd go over and kind of bump him and try to tell him, like, hey, you gotta move, you gotta do something. And so I think having another horse for them to buddy up with, as well as, like, the confidence that he gained in me just reiterating all of his training and giving him verbal cues and letting him understand. And sometimes, you know, if he stepped into his feeder, I kind of let him figure it out as safely as I could. If it was an unsafe situation, obviously I would kind of step in and help a little bit. But for the most part, I've let him explore on his own. I've let him gain his own confidence. I've let him really figure things out. And I think that was a big thing for his confidence. And now he is a social butterfly. Like, any new horse that he can smell, he has to run up to, and he goes and talks to him and tries to get him to play. And I was really glad for the time that we did have Ginger that was something he was really adamant about. He would always go over to her, and he could tell that there was something off about her. Even though he couldn't see her, he knew that she needed a buddy. And so when she would just stand there, if she wouldn't play with him, he'd just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to come and bump up against you. And he would just stand there. And he would just be a buddy for her. And I think that helped her a lot, because she did, within that week that we had her, she gained a lot of confidence thanks to him. Like, she would start exploring a little bit more. She would follow him around because she knew that he was going to lead her to safety. And did he let her run into fences? Yes. He would stop short of the fence and let her keep walking, and she would kind of bump into it, and she'd be like, okay, well, there's a fence there. And I watched him teach her confidence in that week that we had them together. And that was a big heartwarming moment for me. And, you know, he was kind of lost when we came back without her from the vet, because he was like, okay, I don't smell Ginger anymore. And then we turned them all out together, and they were like, okay, somebody's missing. Like, he was actively looking for her. He was like walking up to each horse and sniffing them, and then he'd just kind of stand there like he was confused. And so that was a little extra heartbreak on top of everything else that we had. But, you know, it was really interesting to watch him try and help another horse who couldn't see gain confidence. And I don't know if he just felt like she was just kind of shy or what it was, but he's an amazing horse. And I think that was kind of a big deal for her to have a horse that wasn't just going to push her around, that was actually going to help her. and guide her through things. Because the other two were kind of like, they're a little extra buddied. And so even though she would kind of tag along, they would pretty much ignore her for the most part. So I think her having another horse to buddy up with was a big deal. And at least, you know, when we did have to let her go, she knew what love was. She had a little extra confidence, and she had a full belly for, you know, an actual proper full belly for probably the first time in years. Because she was emaciated. She wasn't as bad as Talus, but she was emaciated. Definitely not an ideal weight for a horse. But I think that was a big game changer for her. And it definitely was for me, watching the perspective change again when it came to Aries and when it came to blind horses. And it's amazing. And I could never imagine how my life would have been and how my horsemanship would have been had I put Aries down. You know, had I taken everybody's advice and not listened to that voice in the back of my head that said, why can't you do this? Why can't you accept this challenge? Why can't you succeed? And that's kind of how we got to where we are now. Had I not had some inkling of self-doubt to take out a horse that has plenty of life left, regardless if he was blind, you know, I don't think I would be where I am. I wouldn't have met the people that I have. I wouldn't have been able to educate people. And I wouldn't have the amazing horse, you know, that he is. And he's in sanctuary with our rescue, so he's always going to have a home. You know, nobody ever wanted him because I couldn't adopt out a blind horse because, oh, what if they run through a fence? And I'm like, no, he knows the fence. He's an amazing horse. He's not dumb. Just because he can't see doesn't mean that he can't see, if that makes sense. Like, his senses are heightened. He can hear things. He can smell things. You know, he might bump into things from time to time, either because he's not paying attention or it's something new that he's trying to figure out. But he's definitely changed the perspective, and every time I interact with him, like, I feel like something changes. But it's never for the worse. It's always for the better. And he just gives me a lot of hope for horses that are out there. Like, you know, a horse like Talus, who's mostly blind, she also gets around pretty well, but she also stays with her buddy. But now that we've kind of introduced the herd completely together, like, him and her interact a lot more. And so, you know, they just kind of stand and chat pretty much. Like, they'll nicker at each other and walk around a little bit. They'll share food, but like, you put them out in the pasture and he always checks in, which is really, really sweet. Like, I never imagined that me helping him gain his confidence was going to help him put confidence in other horses. So it's been a big game changer, and it's amazing. And, you know, Talus is going to stay in sanctuary with us until, you know, I either have to pick a really good day for her, or, you know, she passes on her own. You know, being 34, you never kind of know. I mean, with any animal, honestly, you never know. But yeah, that's kind of where we're sitting at right now. And I'm really excited to just keep working with them, and also with, you know, with the Blind Horse Project, and really advocating and putting out all of this hope for people who need it, you know, and helping people understand a little bit better that these horses are still horses.
Absolutely, Lucinda. Thank you so much for sharing your story today. Do you have any last words for our listeners?
Again, like, we're here to help. There is hope for horses, no matter if it's partially blind from, you know, uveitis, cataracts, leptospirosis, any of those things. There's a network out here. We can help you guys. These horses are still horses, and we're here to help give you hope. There's nothing that they can't do.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lucinda. I know that definitely this podcast, I hope, will reach the people that need to hear it. It's been amazing and inspiring to listen to you talk.
I felt like I was rambling, but I hope that it does help, anybody who's out there.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to sign off now. Thank you, Lucinda, so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. For more information on the Blind Horse Project, feel free to take a look at our other socials, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you would like to submit a journey for the podcast or a video highlight, or if you are interested in joining the Ambassador Program, email us at theblindhorseproject@aol.com. Thanks, everyone.